Motivation can be if you live in the north. We are on month 4 of snow up here in the Wisconsin area, and there is no anytime soon. Motivation isn't always weather related, of course. Sometimes we just plain don't feel like running, or we just don't have that same motivation and inspiration that we want. Today, I am chatting with Coach Jason, who has been a runner himself for over 20 years. He also has over 12 years of experience coaching runners and teaching physical education. He knows the tips and tricks to keep people motivated. So, I guess we'll kick off this podcast by asking, a vulnerable question here. Jason, are you always motivated? And how do you stay motivated after 20 years of running?
That's a really good question. My motivation definitely comes and goes in different ways, and sometimes I'm more motivated to stay in really good shape, and other times I'm motivated just to kind of run, just to maintain general fitness. So for me, I mean, motivation just comes in so many different facets, but it's definitely over the years, as things come up in your life, you're going to go through periods where running sometimes takes a back seat, and I think that's perfectly fine and normal. So what we'd like to discuss today is, some strategies for how you can still stay accountable for running when it's not your top priority.
Yeah, I think, when you get to the, 20-year mark, there's a lot that you've kind of been through with your running experience. But for those listening and who don't know, I met Jason when I was only maybe like 3 or 5 years into my, running journey. And I think a lot of people listening, maybe you are 3 to 5 years in and you're really just into it. Like, I mean, it's the peak. Like, everything is super exciting. I mean, maybe you're having times where like you're not as motivated, but like everything's exciting. You're still probably PRing, no problem. You're not hitting like really big plateaus. You're not like reaching the law of diminishing returns quite yet. But Jason had been running for already, over 10 years, and it was funny to hear him sometimes say like he didn't feel like running, because to me I'm like, well, I always like want to run, or I was super excited all the time about the sport, but like he wasn't. So when did you first start to not feel like as excited about running, or was it like a gradual thing, or when was the first time you were just like, whoa, this is kind of a drag, and like I'm gonna have to actually work and stay dedicated and committed to training, and it's not gonna feel as exciting as it used to be? Like, when did it switch for you?
Yeah, for me, I mean, as Victoria said, I've been running my whole life, and I was part of a team in high school and college, so it was really easy to stay motivated because you'd show up to practice every day and you'd have people around you to run with. So I would say when I started to kind of lose that motivation was probably a year or two after college. I tried to maintain my fitness. I tried to move up in distances and try some longer stuff for a while, like the half marathon and marathon. Um, and I was pretty motivated for a while. And then I got to a point where I started really just focusing on, my professional life, my career, my personal life, and running just sort of, it took a back seat. I never really gave up on it. I never really took more than probably a month off at a time, and that was only in the winter time. But I would just kind of run when I feel like it. So I'd maybe just go out for like 3 to 4 miles here and there, or maybe run 3 to 4 days a week. So, um, I would say, yeah, definitely probably my early 20s. That's kind of when I started to not, not run consistently, probably 30 plus miles a week. Some weeks might have been 10 miles, some weeks might have been like 25. It just really depended.
Yeah, no, I think it's good for people to hear this, and it's like kind of a Debbie Downer, but I think it's just like the realistic behind the scenes, because sometimes you see people who I would consider Jason fast. I think most people listening would consider Jason fast. Running consistently. You're what, 33 now? You're still running in the 16 minutes for a 5K. Um, it's interesting to hear that people who are so fast and so accomplished in the sport can have like such low motivation, like, or feel like not feel that super inspired, like fiery feeling, like get out the door. But it's really funny because actually being at the level that you are at, it's like it's almost the opposite. Like, it's almost easier for you because you're already at such a high level that, oh, well, I don't have to work as hard and I can still be like okay at it, right? I mean, so I feel like even fast people, maybe even more so, struggle with motivation. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends. I've gotten to a point where I realized like I'm probably never gonna run super fast in the shorter races just because I don't have everything, all those resources that I had available to me when I was in college. You know, you have your track, you have your coach, you have your teammates pushing you in every single workout. You have your regular races and competitions that were pretty much every weekend, and so you're getting a good level of competition. And now it's different. You know, you're running more for fun. You're running longer races. You're mixing it up. You might go a month or two in between races, and so um, you know, like Victoria said, I can still put together a pretty decent maybe season and run an okay time, but comparing that back to my PRs, it's really not even that close. If I know that if I really committed myself and I wanted to put in that time and effort, I could probably come close again for some distances, like maybe the 5K. Um, you know, I could certainly do that in a half marathon or marathon, but for me, I need kind of a string of good luck in terms of staying healthy, and that's one thing I've struggled with over the years. Um, but also just making it my top priority. You know, as I mentioned, family is going to be first, and work is obviously right there. So running is a lot of times my third priority, and now that I'm into coaching, I really take more pride in helping other people kind of reach their top potential, and I'm content with kind of what I've achieved at this point. But you know, as I look forward to each season, I always kind of think about what I want to accomplish this year, and so I'll talk a little bit about this later. But I set some goals for this year, and I pretty much do every year, and for the most part, I've been fairly successful at kind of reaching those goals because they're realistic and attainable for where I'm at.
Right, yeah, and I think it's good to point out that you can have other motivation and other goals. It doesn't necessarily have to be to have a PR or to like run your fastest time. And I think, even for me personally, I've been running about a decade now, right? Like competitively. And I think, in the last couple of years, it just kind of like slowly turned into, okay, I can't have my whole motivation be on, running, a PR. And, some people listening, even if they haven't been running that long, maybe they just can't have that be their goal because, like Jason, like he set all of his PRs back, 10 years ago. And it might be not realistic to like use that as a motivational compass. Because I mean, if you went out and you would only be satisfied with, oh, I have to PR, like it's not enough to get you out the door because you know that it's so far away that it's almost like not fair to do to yourself. And I think even for me, like coming back from childbirth, it was the same thing. Like in the first 3 months, like I did like a time trial and I couldn't even run my old easy pace for 2 miles fast. So it can just be really hard, and you have to be conscious not to compare to like the wrong milestones. Going easy on yourself and just making sure you're being kind to yourself with the motivation and not having too high of expectations. But it's great to hear that you do help other people with the coaching, and I'm sure you have a lot of experience helping people reach their goals and working with people who have a variety of different, motivations and things that inspire them to get out the door. What are some things that you find that make people maybe become less motivated, or are there just, do you think it's like an intrinsic thing? Because I know you have some athletes who, like even at the college levels, like they go home for a winter break, you tell them like kind of what to run, the mileage and all that stuff, and some of them will do it, to a T, and other people it's like they won't run at all. What do you think is the differentiator there?
Yeah, I think there's so many factors for each individual athlete. I think a lot of it is intrinsic though. Like who likes to run alone, right? Sometimes we have these college kids who they come to practice every day and they get that camaraderie, so it's kind of easy for them to get their workouts in. But at home, unless they're really intrinsically motivated, they might look for reasons or excuses of why they shouldn't run or other things that they should do ahead of running. And so I think coming back from winter break, it was so easy to tell who had ran, but also I could predict going into winter break who was going to run just because I know which one of my athletes are more intrinsically motivated and who really enjoy running and who have a love for the sport. And sometimes other kids, they want a PR and they like how it feels when they have a good race, but they're really not willing to just dig deep and to put in that extra time and make it, one of their highest priorities. And as a student, a lot of times you're focused on school and you're focused on maybe working. and then spending time with your family because you're away from them so much during the school year. So I get it, but luckily for me, the adult athletes I'm coaching through Run for PRs, most of them are pretty motivated, so we don't worry too much about like that psychology piece. But it's definitely going to be more important for college kids who, um, you know, maybe spending time away from their teammates, and then they lack that motivation during those times. But also, I think where you're at, comparing, putting a lot of pressure on yourself, I think that can also make kids feel like, well, I'm just not as good as them anyway, so I might as well just not do the work. So I think that it really just depends on kind of how secure they are with themselves as a runner too.
Yeah, I think some people don't really struggle with this at all. Even if you've been running for 30 years, there's some people that's like, they'll just get out the door, they're just going to do it. They don't really have a motivation problem, because what it all boils down to, I think at the end of the day, it's not really about, like the warm and fuzzy motivation thing that you're thinking. I think it just comes down to either like a routine, a habit, the Run Streak people, we were talking about that yesterday. We had like all the coaches kind of meet up, and we were eating lunch, and one of the other coaches also had a run streak. I had one for like 550 days. He had one for 365 days. And we were like talking about how it becomes really, really hard to stop, like once it becomes a part of your life. So I think there's even athletes on the opposite end of the spectrum where it's like they have not too much motivation, but it's like too ingrained in their routine where like they can't stop. And I mean, it's not like a problem by any means, but it goes to show you like how powerful a routine is and sticking with it. I mean, for my motivation personally, it's all about the routine. If I didn't have like a routine and if I didn't run at the same time every day and like just follow the same thing, like it wouldn't work for me. It's really hard when I don't have like a consistent routine to find the motivation. But yeah, like you said, it's all about prioritizing, and sometimes it's not a priority for people, or maybe they don't like see the benefits, or it's almost like a delayed gratification
I
thing.
think the younger you are too, you think sometimes you can get by off your talent, and you don't really realize how by not putting it affect you. So
I think even adults struggle with that, though. I mean, I've coached so many people over the years where the intention is there, and it's always like the intention is always there, but when it comes down to like doing the work, sometimes like the motivation just isn't, or like it's just not a priority for some people, or they want it to be and it doesn't turn into one. I'm not really sure. What are some things, like why are there some seasons in your life where you have put running completely like on the back burner, and other seasons where it's not? Like, I mean, do you struggle with motivation personally, or because I know like you've taken a lot more time off than I have.
I think it depends on what else is going on in my life. Like if my mind is primarily focused on like work or family, I might it may not be a priority. And if I don't see myself doing a certain race here in the near future, I just may not be that motivated to run. I'll run minimally just when I can, so that I feel okay and I don't lose a ton of fitness. But I'm at a point now where I think things are we have a good routine, and I'm finding that there's really no excuse anymore. I should be able to get out and give myself 30 minutes most days at least, just to squeeze in a run. So I think for me, following a plan is one thing that I've tried to do recently, and that's really helped me with kind of a comeback to being more accountable. But yeah, I know some people, they have the plan and sometimes they don't follow it, and so for them, I think it's more about figuring out how to fit that in their day and make it part of their daily routine and their habit. And so that can be a challenge for sure. And maybe we're trying to do too much, so maybe then we need to just dial it back and maybe run a few days less per week. So it's really, I think for people, they just need to understand you're going to go through phases in your life where running's more of a priority than it may be during other times. So it just depends on someone. But I think as long as you can stay somewhat consistent with it over time, that's going to help you.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot can be said for Jason, like, kind of losing his motivation, or, like, quote-unquote motivation, like, in his early 20s when he was getting more serious into his career. And I think, like, when you were going back to grad school, like, that definitely played a role.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm always on the boat of, like, you can always make time for your running, like, if it's a priority for you. But I think for some people, like, their life situation doesn't allow it to be, or maybe they just, for whatever reason, like, they're unhappy kind of with what their current life situation is, and like they just don't have enough energy mentally to like make time for themselves. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't talk about. I see it happen a lot where some people I've worked with in the past, or even just like college athletes, like friends, like people I know in the running community, they're really into the running, and then something like some sort of life event happens, or they're in a job that they don't like, or they think that their job is requiring them to work a lot harder, or they just feel kind of stuck in whatever situation they're in, and they don't make that time for themselves, and they kind of get caught up in that routine of, well, I don't have time. And I think and then it affects all aspects of their life. I mean, I've seen people go from running 60 miles a week to just like not running at all. And a lot of that has to do with, figuring out like your priorities and what works for your schedule. I'm all about it. It doesn't have to be like an all or nothing approach. I'd rather see, someone who was running 60 miles a week cut down to 10 miles a week rather than give it up completely, because there might be like other things going on, and it's better to do something than to do nothing, right?
Yeah, I definitely think. When you have a full plate, let's say you're in school, you're working full time, whatever else you have going on, a lot of times when you think about trying to squeeze a run in, you're going to have to sacrifice something with, and then that comes down to maybe your sleep. And for me, I know sleep's always such an important thing because I want to make sure I have physical and mental energy. So it's kind of like, well, do I want to do this run, or would I rather try to wind down and go to bed? Or do I want to wake up at 4:30 and run, or do I want to try to sleep in until 5:45? And then that way when I wake up, I'm at least hopefully not dead tired middle of the day. So I think finding the balance, and maybe it's a little bit of both. Maybe you are waking up once or twice during the week, and then maybe you're doing some night runs or whatever. Or maybe it's just running 3 days a week during the week when you're working, and then you try to run on the weekends to make it 4 or 5 days a week. So I think just being really creative and open to how you can balance everything is going to be a good way for you to try to run more. So
yeah, I think a big part of it comes down to like committing to yourself also. So like not giving up on yourself, even if, work is super stressful and like your boss is like, you have all these projects or you have a lot on your plate. And like, I know life can get super busy, like been there, done that, it happens. Like life goes through seasons. And I think the biggest thing with running is like consistency. And if you can just stay consistent, let's say you have a really busy week, I guarantee you can still make time to like run, 3 times within that week, 30 minutes. Like if you just squeeze it in somehow, the weekend, there's always time on the weekend. You can make time, maybe that's waking up 30 minutes earlier. Maybe it's 45 minutes earlier. Maybe it's taking a lunch break run, like there are ways to fit it in. It might not be the way that you want to do it. It might not be the ideal way, but I think just being honest with yourself and finding the time to do it, and then that consistency can like trickle. Because I think the biggest thing that I've witnessed with Jason is like if he gets off track for a week, or if life gets busy for a week and he like misses a week or like 5 days or 3 days or 2 days, whatever it is, it can all of a sudden just like trickle. It's just like, oh, well, I missed a whole, well, I'm just going to like, and I've seen it happen with athletes and stuff before too, because 1 day turns into 2, 2 days turns into 3. And I think the biggest thing is like not breaking the promise to yourself when you say like, this is what I have scheduled for the week, but not taking that out of context also. I mean, like things happen, people get sick, you sometimes have to miss a run, but I think that the biggest thing is don't skip a beat after that. Like if you had to stay late at work, if your kid's sick, whatever, the next day, like try to just start fresh and don't let that one thing that happened 1 day, 1 week ruin like your entire running career. Because I really think, honestly, that happens to people. It's like they have one hard week, one hard month, and they just give up completely. And I think the biggest thing is just the resilience of getting back out there. And, no one's perfect. No one's like Jason's taken weeks, months off at a time, but like you can always start back, and don't be ashamed of like where your starting point is. I mean, think of how many times you've started back.
Yeah.
I mean, what is one of the first races you came back where you were like, at least 5 minutes off of PR, right? I mean, like, or 4 minutes, like in a 5K. Because I can think of like so many races where I was signed up for the 5K. I signed Jason up, and these are 5Ks, and he was like a 15:30 is his PR, 15:28, 29, and he'll go out, and yeah, it's still a fast time. He runs like 19:30, but like that's 4 minutes slower than what he could run when he's in shape. And I think for a lot of people, and that's just a 5K, like he wouldn't even physically be able to finish a half marathon or a marathon, right? So I think just putting it in perspective and knowing that everyone has times where they take time off, come back, and kind of start from like a starting point, maybe not ground zero, because no one can be perfect. No one has perfect training all the time, and setting small goals for yourself along the way. So, Jason, when you do come back into the sport, or when you're done taking time off, like what are some of the things that you do to like help you stay motivated?
Yeah. So first, I'll pick a race. I'll sign up for something. Sort of set a realistic goal for, let's say it's 8 weeks from now. I'm going to pick a time that I think I should be able to run in 8 weeks. I'm not going to pick a time that I could run now, and I'm not going to pick a time that I could have ran 3 years ago when I was more fit. So it's going to be realistic, somewhat challenging, so that I can kind of, from week to week, slowly build towards that goal. And then I'm really just going to make sure I'm slowing down on my easy days, so I'm not feeling like burnt out. I'm going to make sure my workouts are spaced out evenly and that they're attainable, so that I can complete the workouts and kind of gain confidence from that and start to generate more momentum for more exciting training. And so that's kind of what I do when I'm trying to come back. Is I'll usually pick a race that Victoria's going to do, or that I have friends going to, just so that it's kind of a social outing too, and I feel like accountable to having to show up and do the race, and then I make sure that I'm training accordingly.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's important to note there, like picking the time goal and having something realistic, which I think is something that he struggled with kind of the first couple of years that he wasn't like in peak shape. It was like you always want to strive to kind of be at that like peak level that you were once at. And if you're not there, you still kind of want to set the goal there, even though maybe the fitness isn't there. But I think that was like a big like negative downside for him, because I watched him do that sometimes, and it was like he'd be 45 seconds off or a minute off of where he like wanted to be, and it can just be like a motivational killer, because you go out there, you're like, yeah, you're like trying to force fitness, and when it's not there, it can hurt your motivation. So I always like to think like, set goals of like maybe even a little bit below your level. That way you're like excited when you cross the finish line and it's faster. There's definitely no shame in maybe not being in your peak fitness at all times. Like we always talk about, it's easier to get back into shape than it is to get in shape in the first place. He has a friend that he went to high school with who he was competitive running until like 2015. And then he just decided to stop for 3 years straight, like didn't run at all, literally didn't run at all. He was like a 2:35 marathoner, and he just stopped. He DNF'd in a race and then just never ran again for 3 years. And then he came back onto the running scene, and we were like, okay, like what is he going to run? And he goes out and he's like clipping faster times than he ever has before. And he ended up running like 2:23 at CIM this year. So, I mean, he's taken, 15 or 12 minutes off his marathon time and reached a totally new level, but he took 3 years off, and he did all of this within 2 years, with 2 years of training. So it's like he's in a better spot now, having take 3 years off and only been training for 2 years, than maybe he even would be if he just consistently, tried to muscle through for the full 5 years. So I think the biggest thing there is you can get in better shape. Taking 3 years off isn't going to like affect you forever, or even taking like 2 months off. Your first run back is going to feel really hard, or like the first 2 months back might be really hard, but maybe in a year from then, you're going to be at a whole new level. So don't like judge things based on how they are the first couple of weeks or months, because running is one of those things where it's like a compounding effect, and you're not going to see the gains, realize the gains right away for the most part, especially if you're an experienced runner. It's all about the consistency and the time. So just like giving yourself a full 6 to 12 months to commit to a training block. Don't ever judge your progress based on like one single run or 1 month of training. You have to give yourself consistency. So I wouldn't place motivation on any of those things. But like Jason said, I think getting a race on the calendar is definitely helpful. But setting realistic goals. I know there's some people like your friend Matt, who we were just talking about, the 2:23 marathoner. He doesn't like to race unless he's like in peak shape. So if someone doesn't want to race unless they're going after a PR, which I kind of get, I'm a little bit like that also. what are some ways that they can stay motivated to train and like just improve so that they can get into that peak shape again?
Yeah, I think following a plan so that they're getting workouts on the calendar, and then they can kind of check their progress from how they're doing in their workouts, and then also just I think running with a group or finding a friend to run with consistently. That way you have that social time and you're accountable to meeting up with them. And then choosing some new routes. I think for me that gets me excited when I get to run something new, and even a different style of workout too. So maybe discovering a new area, maybe changing something in your training that you haven't really done in a long time, like starting to incorporate hill work or more, maybe longer tempo work. Let's say you used to just do a bunch of shorter, faster interval work, and so changing it, I think, can help kind of respark and reignite that interest for running. Um, and then for me, it's just really about not thinking about the past. Forgetting about what my PRs are, forgetting about what I did a year or two ago, unless it's going to actually help me, motivate me to get on the right track. Then I'll remind myself. For the most part, I'm not going to worry too much about what I used to do or how fit I used to be. I'm going to focus on the small things I can do day in and day out that is going to get me to the my goals for the future.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm not looking at what you did in the past or looking at past workouts. I think that's always kind of like a negative thing. I don't really see like any sort of benefit of looking backwards for the most part, because you can often look back at the past through like rose colored lenses where you see things and you think, oh, it used to be so easy for me back then, or oh, like remember back then, or like before kids when I used to be able to run 70 miles a week, and wow, like I could never do that now. And sometimes we just have like these ways of thinking, and we don't even know like how we actually felt back then. If I look back at a run from 2014, I have no idea how I felt on that run. Like I have absolutely no idea. And then I look at it and I think, wow, like looks like I was in really good shape. But it's not telling the full story. And so even just looking back at like how many miles you ran in a certain year, I can look back 2014, 2015, 2016. I ran like 3,000 miles those years. They were not my fastest years by any means. I mean, some of the years I ran my fastest times were in the last year or two, and I barely even hit 2,000 miles. And so you can't compare training like that because it's not indicative of the fitness you're in. It's not indicative of kind of what your future is going to look like necessarily. So don't focus too much on the past. Start a new plate, and then comparing workouts, like 3 weeks in the past, right? Or like a month in the past.
Right.
I think that's okay. Like within a training block, it's good to do. But when you start looking back at like the peak workout you did in a marathon training build like 4 years ago, it's like I don't know if that's as relevant for training. But again, I like how you talked about finding a group run or like finding a new route. Those are all ways that can help you stay motivated. Some people I know like to listen to music or download podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other things that you do that are things that people could do if they're just like not feeling their run? What are some things you do to get
I
inspired?
think mix it up. I've gone through a lot of podcasts where I've listened to on the runs. I've watched Netflix on an iPad if I'm running on the treadmill. I'll take my dog for a run. Like just figure out a way if I'm lacking motivation to get me to think, well, you should really do this because you're gonna feel good about it afterwards. And that's kind of where I go back to thinking is, well, how are you gonna feel an hour or 2 hours from now if you do this run? And then that's usually enough to, if I'm teetering between whether I should run or not, that's usually enough to kind of tip me over the edge and say, okay, just lace it up and go. So I think it's always about, you're never going to regret going for a run, but you may regret not going for a run. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, I guess another question to ask, because I get asked this a lot, like how do I handle going on the treadmill? Like how do I handle, don't I ever get bored? What do I think about when I'm running? Is running for you ever boring?
I mean, yeah, all the time. When I go out and especially if I'm kind of doing the same old route from my house that I've done so many times, it can be really boring. And so I'll try to think about something that gets me excited or just something that's going to take my mind off the monotonous, the monotony of having to just run alone and no one to talk to. And so, or I might start thinking about a workout that I have coming up or the next race or some sort of pacing plan, or I'll do math in my head, just something that kind of helps break up the run and gives me something to focus on rather than the negative thoughts of boredom.
Yeah, I definitely think running is boring. It can be like, why am I doing this? I could be doing a million other things right now. I mean, you get those thoughts all the time when you're running or you're a runner, especially for me. On the easy days, I think that's why a lot of runners struggle with slowing down on their easy days, because it's super boring. It is. And your mind starts to wander. And especially the beginning, the first, 30 minutes of a run, you're like, what am I doing out here? This is boring. It's lonely. I mean, you get the thoughts. I'm really good at, like, trying to push them out of my head. But that doesn't mean, like, I'm immune from them, Like, every single day when I run easy, I feel just, I get a thought where it's like, yeah, this is boring. And I think, it's okay to admit that and let people know that's how it kind of is sometimes. Like, if you have running goals and you want to, have a certain lifestyle and have, good fitness and health, sometimes that means doing things that aren't always fun. Like, running's not always fun. Neither is, working. Working's not always fun, but you still get up and go to work every day, I think, sometimes people think running's all is like sunshine and rainbows, and there definitely are those moments, but it's not always fun. I mean, it's the same that goes for anything in life. Like, there's nothing in life that's, like, always fun, like being a homeowner, not always fun. Like, being a parent, not always fun. Like, being married, not always fun, right? Like, we kind of get into the culture of, like, oh, it's supposed to be so nice and fun, and you see all the highlight reels on social media and people posting, like, oh, my 8-mile run, easy. It's like,
right.
Sometimes those are the hardest runs, those easy runs. It's like, gosh, you're out there for so long. And I think some people, when they don't have, like, a running community or people who are open about this stuff, it can be hard, because then they think, like, they're failing. They're like, well, why am I feeling like it's boring? Why do I feel like I'm not enjoying it? I think sometimes people overthink it, because it's not, like, always enjoyable. Life isn't always enjoyable. Running is not always super enjoyable. But it's the consistency of showing up that's, like, super rewarding. And I think the same can be true for anything, like in business, in your career, like, the parts of those things, or even in marriage, like with kids, the parts of it that are rewarding is that you do it through the hard times and you consistently show up for the good and the bad. And then at the end of the day, like, when you accomplish something, a goal that you set for yourself of, like, doing all of the hard stuff, that's when you can really feel like, oh, all of this was worth it, or, like, I feel rewarded, or you feel like confident in what you've accomplished as a runner. Whereas, I mean, it would be easy to give up, right? Like, to just, oh, it's hard, it's boring, and give up. But the thing that keeps me going is, like, I know once you do accomplish a goal, it can just be, it's just a really, like, it's a rewarding thing. It's a very delayed gratification. And I think that's maybe what caused you to continue running, is because you did experience, like, so many long-term rewards with running at a young age, and that you think, even though you might never PR again, you're never going to run a 4:14 mile ever again, but you can still chase that, like, maybe if I just consistently work at something for a year, I can be really proud of, like, finishing a marathon or just running a half marathon. Even if it's not my best, it's, like, something you created and, like, you're proud of it.
Yeah, you're the only one that can kind of set that expectation of what's meant for you. And, when you're lacking the kind of those positive thoughts on a day-to-day basis, like, if you're just kind of negative and you're bored on your run, or you want to cut it short, or you're debating on whether or not you should even go run, I always just try to flip it into a positive and think about, like, why am I doing this? How am I going to feel after? Kind of thinking about that delayed gratification, like Victoria said, like, how am I going to feel at the end of May when I run that 5K time if I meet my goal? Or sometimes I think about, how am I going to feel if I don't meet my goal? And then that's enough to get me motivated. And so just being really always kind of thinking about the glass half full, like, what can I do to flip this into a positive, whatever that negative thought is. That's kind of what I try to do to get me out the door or to get me through the workout.
Yeah, I like how you said you kind of always have that goal in mind, and you always think, what's going to happen, like, if I don't do this run. So I do that all the time, like, projecting myself. So, like, today on my run, I'm on the treadmill, it's winter, I'm trying to get 7 miles in, right? Like, and all I can think of is, like, what's the point? Like, what is this going to do? Like, I just had, like, a lot of those thoughts today. Like, I was like, what's the point? Another 7-mile run? Like, you've done this a bazillion times. Just call it a day. So then what I do instead is, like, I project myself, like, 6 months in the future, like, yeah, I don't have to run anymore. Like, and then I say that to myself, like, yeah, get off the treadmill. You don't have to run. Just never do it again. Like, just never do it again then, right? Like, if that's what you want, like, if that's what my brain is telling me to do, and then I say, okay, well, then what will my life look like, in 6 to 12 months if I just listened to this voice and never ran again? And I'm like, I wouldn't like the person that I am. Like, I've been there. Like, I know what that's like. Like, I've been overweight. Like, I've been told by doctors, like, your blood pressure's too high. Like, I've been really uncomfortable. I've had a bad diet before where, like, I'm constantly, like, just not feeling good and, like, always getting sick and all of those things. And I don't want to, like, have a life like that. So then I say, okay, I would rather spend, 30 minutes every day of my brain saying, like, don't do this, and feel good for a lifetime than, listen to my thoughts one time, never run again, and then start to feel like crap within 6 months of my life, and then question, like, why I ever gave it up. So you have to fight, like, these mental demons every day in order to, like, feel the rewards of running, and, like, get those benefits. But, if you listen to it one time, it can really cause a lot of pain for the rest of your life. But I think that's the biggest thing there. So some tough love for people who are listening. But I think it, like, puts things into perspective in terms of, like, it's not always fun. And sometimes it just takes, like, a level of dedication, prioritization of your health. Because, I mean, even for you, like, you've gone through seasons where, like, you weren't really running, like, and what made you, like, did you start to feel like crap and you just wanted to feel better about yourself? Or, like, what was the motivating factor that, like, got you back into training more consistently?
I think it was I just started to feel not so great about myself, like, mentally, my energy level, but also physically. Just noticing how, sometimes when I'm running more, I'm trying to eat healthier too. So that goes hand in hand because I want to feel better and I want to make sure I'm fueling and replenishing after workouts. So I think it's a trickle-down effect. And, luckily for me, I don't think I've really ever taken more than probably 2 or 3 weeks off in a row unless I was injured. That was the only time where I really took, like, a month or almost 2 months off. I remember once after a marathon. Didn't run from basically the end of October till the start of the year. But other than that, it's only been just I tried to really limit the time I'm taking off, and I tried to then start back running just a couple days a week just so that I'm start generating some momentum again.
Right, and I think what's important for people listening to also understand is that, like, yeah, Jason's only taking, like, a month off at a time, but consistently, like, his mileage, I think that's a key. Like, sometimes people, they go out, they're like, I have to run, like, a ton, like, it's like an all or nothing approach. But for Jason, like, sometimes it's just like, okay, I'm gonna run three times this week, 3 or 4 miles, and that's just enough to be, consistent. And it's better to do that than just, like, throw in the towel, do nothing for, like, a year, because it's just, the whole thing just seems like too much. And I think just finding what that balance is and, like, what fits in with your life and what is, like, the mileage that's not draining you. Because sometimes people, maybe they start a plan or they start working with a coach or something, and the coach, the plan, whatever, they think they have to run, like, 25 miles a week. And it's just not possible for them to, like, jump into that because they don't have, like, the background or whatever, and it just mentally drains them, physically drains them. Like, the intention is good, but when you don't have, like, the progressive overload into that workload, it can overwhelm you, and then, 2-3 months down the road, you give it up completely because you think, like, it has to be this all or nothing, black or white, where in reality, it's just consistency. It's just showing up. There's really not, like, a secret behind it. But yeah, consistency is huge. I think another thing, we're talking a lot about, like, forcing yourself to get out the door and all that sort of stuff. There are some things like the group running, I think helps a lot. You run with the team now that you're a coach, and I think that helps a lot with motivation because it's just like you can run with them and you don't have to think about it. Sometimes people, they get in their own heads, and I think group running is great for that because you can get the socialization and the run done all in once. And every time I run with people, I'm like, wow, that went by, like, way faster. And it's just like killing 2 birds with one stone. I think group runs are great, or, like, running with a person. We also have a dog that likes to run. So, I mean, really, if you're lacking motivation, that's another option. If you have a dog who wants to run, or just go to the Humane Society and look at what dogs would be good runners and then go adopt a dog, because dogs love to run. My dog used to run 40 miles a week with me.
Yeah.
And it's a huge motivation because I'll be like, I don't want to run. And then I'm like, I think my dog does though. And, like, I should run for my dog. And then just it becomes more of like an accountability thing. And same with a training partner. I think that helps a lot. So how would you like suggest someone like find a training partner or a running group?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the area you live in, I'd first, you can look online and search for local running organizations. You can you can check with your local shoe stores, your running shoe stores. I think that's a good place to start. A lot of times there's racing teams or there's just large organizations. So most metropolitan areas are going to have plenty of those. If you're kind of in a smaller rural community, it might be a little more difficult. You may have to look at like local fitness centers and see if they have any run groups there, um, or join more virtual groups and just find people that you can connect with who are in a similar situation. You can text them and or find someone maybe at your place of work or someone that enjoys running who lives near you, and then you can meet up and do runs, even if it's just once a week or once a month. That's better than nothing.
Right, yeah. I feel like this podcast has kind of been all over the place, like
Yeah.
tidbits of motivation and what to do and how to find group training. But the biggest takeaway here is that, you're not always going to feel motivated, and it's all about like dedicating yourself and making yourself and your running a priority. Running's not just about running, right? It's about like your health. And this is the way that a lot of us have chosen to stay healthy. And that's so it's important to make it a priority. And finding it a way that it fits within your schedule. Maybe you're not in a good season of life where it makes sense to train for a marathon. Like maybe you don't have the time commitment that you want to train for one, and that can actually negatively impact your motivation because you're signed up for this race, but it's not feasible with the schedule and the time constraints that you're under. So finding something that excites you and something that's going to drive your motivation and not dwindle it, and just being honest with yourself about like what is the time commitment that you have and how much of a priority can you make running in your life, and then working on ways to amplify that within your training. So I really appreciate everyone listening, and hopefully this helped, or was at least people can relate in some way and understand that everyone kind of struggles with motivation from time to time, and it's all about showing up for yourself and just consistently putting in the work. There's not a lot of secrets involved, but now that you kind of know other people struggle with it, maybe it makes it a little bit easier for you to get out the door. So if you want more information about coaching, because I know sometimes working with a coach or having a training plan and having those workouts to look forward to can serve as a motivational purpose, you can try us out for free, a 7-day trial, if you go to www.run4prs.co. We can chat more and get you started on a free 7-day trial. So thanks for tuning in, and until next time.